time being, I gave up writing. There is already too much truth in the world, an overproduction which apparently cannot be consumed. Auto rank. The prospect of death, Dr. Johnson said, wonderfully concentrates the mind. The main thesis of this book is that it does much more than that. The idea of death, the fear of it, haunts the human animal like nothing else. It is a mainspring of human activity. Activity designed largely to avoid the fatality of death, to overcome it by denying in some way that it is the final destiny for man. The noted anthropologist A.M. Hocart once argued that primitives were not bothered by the fear of death. That is a sagacious sampling of anthropological evidence, sagacious sampling of anthropological evidence would show that death was, more often than not, accompanied by rejoicing and festivities. That death seemed to be an occasion for celebration rather than fear, much like the traditional Irish wake. Hocart wanted to dispel the notion that, compared to modern man, primitives were childish and frightened by reality. Anthropologists have now largely accomplished this rehabilitation of the primitive, but this argument leaves untouched the fact that the fear of death is indeed a universal in the human condition. To be sure, primitives often celebrate death, as Hocart and others have shown, because they believe that death is the ultimate promotion, the final ritual elevation to a higher form of life, to the enjoyment of eternity in some form. Most modern Westerners have trouble believing this anymore, which is what makes the fear of death so prominent, a part of our psychological makeup. In these pages, I try to show that the fear of death is a universal that unites data from several disciplines of the human sciences and makes wonderfully clear the intelligible human actions that we have buried under the mountains of fact and obscured with endless back and forth arguments about the true human motives. The man of knowledge in our time is bowed down under a burden he never imagined he would ever have. The overproduction of truth that cannot be consumed. For centuries, man lived in the belief that truth was slim and elusive, and that once he found it, the troubles of mankind would be over. And here we are in the closing decades of the 20th century, choking on truth. There has been so much brilliant writing, so many genial discoveries, so vast an extension and elaboration of these discoveries, yet the mind is silent as the world spins on its age-old demonic career. I remember reading how, at the famous St. Louis World Exposition in 1904, the speaker at the prestigious science meeting was having trouble speaking against the noise of the new weapons that were being demonstrated nearby. He said something condescending and tolerant about this needlessly disruptive play, as though the future belonged to the science and not to militarism. World War I showed everyone the priority of things on this planet, which party was playing idle games and which wasn't. This year, the order of priority was again graphically shown by a world arms budget of $204 billion at a time when human living conditions on the planet were worse than ever. This music is nice. Who wrote this song? Why, then, the reader may ask, add still another weighty tome a large, heavy, and often scholarly book, frequently representing an important or weighty volume. Add still another weighty tome to a useless overproduction? Well, there are personal reasons, of course. Habit, drivenness, dogged hopefulness. Oh yeah, this is much better. Nice, we have a black background now. What happened there? I just refreshed it so I could use the definition extension, but it's not working for whatever reason. Oh well. Alright. Well, there are personal reasons, of course. Habit, drivenness, dogged hopefulness. And there is eros, the urge to the unification of experience, to form, to greater meaningfulness. One of the reasons I believe that knowledge is in a state of useless overproduction is that it is strewn all over the place, spoken in 1,000 competitive voices. Its insignificant fragments are magnified all out of proportion, while its major and world historical insights lie around begging for attention. There is no throbbing, vital center. Norman O. Brown observed that the great world needs more eros and less strife, and the intellectual world needs it just as much. There has to be revealed the harmony that unites many different positions, so that the sterile and ignorant polemics can be abated. Polemics. Sorry. It is a strong, aggressive, written or spoken attack on a specific doctrine, opinion, or belief. Oh. There has to be revealed the harmony that unites many different positions, so that the sterile and ignorant polemics can be abated. I have written this book fundamentally as a study in harmonization of the babel of views on man and on the human condition, and the belief that the time is ripe for a synthesis that covers the best thought in many fields, from the human sciences to religion. I have tried to avoid moving against and negating any point of view, no matter how personally antipathetic it is to me, if it seems to have in it a core of truthfulness. I have had the growing realization over the past few years that the problem of man's knowledge is not to oppose and to demolish opposing views, but to include them in a larger theoretical structure. One of the ironies of the creative process is that it partly cripples itself in order to function. I mean that, usually, in order to turn out a piece of work, the author has to exaggerate the emphasis of it, to oppose it in a forcefully competitive way to other versions of truth. And he gets carried away by his own exaggeration as his distinctive image is built on it. But each honest thinker who is basically an empiricist has to have some truth in his position, no matter how extremely he has formulated it. The problem is to find the truth underneath the exaggeration, to cut away the excess elaboration or distortion, and include that truth where it and include that truth where it fits. A second reason for my writing this book is that I have had more than my share of problems with fitting together of valid truths in the past dozen years. I've been trying to come to grips with the ideas of Freud and his interpreters and heirs with what might be the distillation of modern psychology, and now I think I have finally succeeded. In this sense, this book is a bid for the peace of my scholarly soul, an offering for intellectual absolution. I feel that it is my first mature work. One of the main things I try to do in this book is to present a summing up of psychology after Freud by tying the whole development of psychology, back to the still towering Kierkegaard. I am thus arguing for a merger of psychology and mythical religious perspective. I base this argument in large part on the work of Otto Rank, and I have made a major attempt to transcribe the relevance of his magnificent edifice of thought. This coming to grips with Rank's work is long overdue, and if I have succeeded in it, it probably comprises the main value of the book. Rank is so prominent in these pages that perhaps a few words of introduction about him would be helpful here. Frederick Perls once observed that Rank's book, Art and Artist, was beyond praise. I remember being so struck by this judgment that I went immediately to the book. I couldn't very well imagine how anything scientific could be beyond praise. Even the work of Freud himself seemed to me to be praiseworthy, that is, somehow expectable as a product of the human mind. But Perls was right. Rank was, as the young people say, something else. You cannot merely praise much of his work because in its stunning brilliance it is often fantastic, gratuitous, superlative. The insights seem like a gift beyond what is necessary. I suppose part of the reason, in addition to his genius, was that Rank's thought always spanned several fields of knowledge. When he talked about, say, anthropological data, and you expected anthropological insight, you got something else, something more. Living as we do in an era of hyper-specialization, we have lost the expectation of this kind of delight. The experts give us manageable thrills, if they thrill us at all. One thing that I hope my confrontation of Rank will do is to send the reader directly to his books. There is no substitute for reading Rank. My personal copies of his books are marked in the covers with an uncommon abundance of notes, underlinings, double exclamation points. He is a mine for years of insights and pondering. My treatment of Rank is merely an outline of his thought, its foundations, many of its basic insights, and its overall implications. This will be the pale Rank, not the staggeringly rich one of his books. Also, Ira Progoff's outline presentation and appraisal of Rank is so correct, so finely balanced in judgment, that it can hardly be improved upon as a brief appreciation. Rank is very diffuse, very hard to read, so rich that he is almost inaccessible to the general reader. He was painfully aware of this and for a long time hoped that Anais Nin would rewrite his books for him so that they would have a chance to have the effect they should and have had. What I give in these pages is my own version of Rank, filled out in my own way, a sort of brief translation of his system in the hope of making it accessible as a whole. In this book, I cover only his individual psychology. In another book, I will sketch his schema for a psychology of history. There are several ways of looking at Rank. Some see him as a brilliant co-worker of Freud, a member of the early circle of psychoanalysis, who helped give it broader currency by bringing to it his own vast erudition, who showed how psychoanalysis could illuminate cultural history, myth, and legend, as, for example, in his early work on the myth of the birth of the hero and the incest motif. They would go on to say that because Rank was never analyzed, his repressions gradually got the better of him, and he turned away from the stable and creative life he had close to Freud. In his later years, his personal instability gradually overcame him, and he died prematurely in frustration and loneliness. Others see Rank as an over-ego disciple of Freud, who tried prematurely to be original, and in doing so, even exaggerated psychoanalytic reductionism. This judgment is based almost solely on his 1924 book, The Trauma of Birth, and usually stops there. Still, others see Rank as a brilliant member of Freud's close circle, an eager favorite of Freud, whose university education was suggested and financially helped by Freud, and who repaid psychoanalysis with insights into many fields: cultural history, childhood development, the psychology of art, literary criticism, primitive thought, and so on. In short, a sort of many-faceted, but not too well-organized or self-controlled boy wonder. Excuse me. An intellectually superior Theodore Reich, so to speak. But all these ways of summing up Rank are wrong, and we know that they derive largely from the mythology of the circle of psychoanalysts themselves. They never forgave Rank for turning away from Freud and so diminishing their own immortality symbol, to use Rank's way of understanding their bitterness and pettiness. Admittedly, Rank's trauma of birth gave his detractors an easy handle on him, a justified reason for disparaging his stature. It was an exaggerated and ill-fated book that poisoned his public image, even though he himself reconsidered it and went so far beyond it. Not being merely a co-worker of Freud, a broad-ranging servant of psychoanalysis, Rank had his own unique and perfectly thought-out system of ideas. He knew where he wanted to begin, what body of data he had to pass through, and where it all pointed. He knew these things specifically as regards psychoanalysis itself, which he wanted to transcend and did. He knew it roughly as regards the philosophical implications of his own system of thought, but he was not given the time to work this out, as his life was cut short. He was certainly as complete a system maker as were Adler and Jung. His system of thought is at least as brilliant as theirs, if not more so in some ways. We respect Adler for the solidity of his judgment, the directness of his insight, his uncompromising humanism. We admire Jung for the courage and openness with which he embraced both science and religion. But even more than these two, Rank's system has implications for the deepest and broadest development of the social sciences, implications that have only begun to be tapped. Paul Rosen, writing about the legend of Freud, aptly observed that any writer whose mistakes have taken this long to correct is quite a figure in intellectual history. Yet the whole matter is very curious, because Adler, Jung, and Rank very early corrected most of Freud's basic mistakes. The question for the historian, rather, is what there was in the nature of the psychoanalytic movement, the ideas themselves, the public and the scholarly mind that kept these corrections so ignored, or so separated from the main movement of cumulative scientific thought. The question for the historian, rather, is what there was in the nature of the psychoanalytic movement, or what there was in the nature of the psychoanalytic movement. The ideas themselves, the public and scholarly mind that kept these corrections so ignored, or so separated from the main movement of cumulative scientific thought. Even a book of broad scope has to be very selective of the truths it picks out, of the mountain of truth that is stifling us. Many thinkers of importance are mentioned only in passing. The reader may wonder, for example, why I lean so much on rank and hardly mention Jung in a book that has a major aim, the closure of psychoanalysis on religion. Oh, that's kind of bright. What the hell? Okay. It's kind of dark. Hold on. Okay. One reason is that Jung is so prominent and has so many effective interpreters, while rank is hardly known and has had hardly anyone to speak for him. Another reason is that although rank's thought is difficult, it is always right on the central problems. Jung's is not, and a good part of it wanders into needless esotericism. The result is that he often obscures on the one hand what he reveals on the other. I can't see that all his tomes on alchemy add one bit to the weight of his psychoanalytic insight. A good many phrasings of insight into human nature I owe to exchanges with Marie Becker, whose fineness and realism on these matters are most rare. I want to thank, with the customary disclaimers, Paul Rosen for his kindness in passing Chapter 6 through the net of his great knowledge of Freud. Robert and Bella read the entire manuscript, and I'm very grateful for his general criticisms and specific suggestions. Those that I was able to act on definitely improved the book. As for the others, I fear that they pose the larger and longer range task of changing myself. The denial of death. Chapter 1. Introduction. Human nature and the heroic. In times such as ours, there is a great pressure to come up with concepts that help men understand their dilemma. There is an urge towards vital ideas, towards a simplification of needless intellectual complexity. Sometimes this makes for big lies that resolve tensions and make it easy for action to move forward with just the rationalizations that people need. But it also makes for the slow disengagement of truths that help men get a grip on what is happening to them, that tell them where the problems really are. One such vital truth that has long been known is the idea of heroism. But in normal scholarly times, we never thought of making much out of it, or of parading it, or of using it as a central concept. Yet the popular mind always knew how important it was, as William James, who covered just about everything, remarked at the turn of the century. Mankind's common instinct for reality, ... has always held the world to be essentially a theater for heroism. Not only the popular mind knew, but philosophers of all ages, and in our culture, especially Emerson and Nietzsche, which is why we still thrill to them. We like to be reminded that our central calling, our main task on this planet, is the heroic. One way of looking at the whole development of social science since Marx and of psychology since Freud is that it represents a massive detailing and clarification of the problem of human heroism. This perspective sets the tone for the seriousness of our discussion. We now have the scientific underpinning for a true understanding of the nature of heroism and its place in human life. If mankind's common instinct for reality is right, we have achieved the remarkable feat of exposing that reality in a scientific way. One of the key concepts for understanding man's urge to heroism is the idea of narcissism. As Erich Fromm has so well reminded us, this idea is one of Freud's great and lasting contributions. Freud discovered that each of us repeats the tragedy of the mythical Greek Narcissus. We are hopelessly absorbed with ourselves. If we care about anyone, it is usually ourselves first of all. As Aristotle somewhere put it, luck is when the guy next to you gets hit with the arrow. 2,500 years of history have not changed man's basic narcissism. Most of the time, for most of us, this is still a workable definition of luck. It is one of the meaner aspects of narcissism that we feel that practically everyone is expendable except ourselves. We should feel prepared, as Emerson once put it, to recreate the whole world out of ourselves, even if no one else existed. The thought frightens us. We don't know how we could do it without others, yet, at bottom, the basic resource is there. We could suffice alone if need be, if we could trust ourselves as Emerson wanted. And if we don't feel this trust emotionally, still most of us would struggle to survive with all our powers, no matter how many around us died. Our organism is ready to fill the world all alone, even if our mind shrinks at the thought. This narcissism is what keeps men marching into point-blank fire in wars. At heart, one doesn't feel that he will die. He only feels sorry for the man next to him. Freud's explanation for this was that the unconscious does not know death or time. In man's physiochemical inner organic recesses, he feels immortal. None of these observations implies human guile. Man does not seem to help his selfishness. It seems to come from his animal nature. Through countless ages of evolution, the organism has had to protect his own integrity. It had its own physiochemical identity and was dedicated to preserving it. This is one of the main problems in organ transplants. The organism protects itself against foreign matter, even if it is a new heart that would keep it alive. The protoplasm itself harbors its own, nurtures itself against the world. Excuse me. Against invasions of its integrity. It seems to enjoy its own pulsations, expanding into the world and ingesting pieces of it. If you took a blind and dumb organism and gave it self-consciousness and a name, if you made it stand out of nature and know consciously that it was unique, then you would have narcissism. In man, physiochemical identity and the sense of power and activity have become conscious. In man, a working level of narcissism is inseparable from self-esteem, from a basic sense of self-worth. We have learned, mostly from Alfred Adler, that what man needs most is to feel secure in his self-esteem. But man is not just a blind glob of idling protoplasm, but a creature with a name who lives in a world of symbols and dreams and not merely matter. His sense of self-worth is constituted symbolically. His cherished narcissism feeds on symbols, on an abstract idea of his own worth, an idea composed of sounds, words, and images in the air, in the mind, on paper. And this means that man's natural yearning for organismic activity, the pleasures of an incorporation and expansion, can be fed limitlessly in the domain of symbols and so into immortality. The single organism can expand into dimensions of worlds and times without moving a physical limb. It can take eternity into itself even as it gaspingly dies. In childhood, we see the struggle for self-esteem at its least disguised. The child is unashamed about what he needs and wants most. Her whole organism shouts the claims of their natural narcissism, and this claim can make childhood hellish for the adults concerned, especially when there are several children competing at once for the prerogatives of limitless self-extension, what we might call cosmic significance. The term is not meant to be taken lightly, because this is where our discussion is leading. We like to speak casually about sibling rivalry, as though it were some kind of byproduct of growing up, a bit of competitiveness and selfishness of children who have been spoiled, who haven't yet grown into a generous social nature. but it is too all-absorbing and relentless to be an aberration. It expresses the heart of the creature, the desire to stand out, to be the one in creation. When you combine natural narcissism with a basic need for self-esteem, you create a creature who has to feel himself an object of primary value, first in the universe, representing in him all of life. This is the reason for the daily and usually excruciating struggle with siblings. The child cannot allow himself to be second best or devalued, much less left out. You gave him the biggest piece of candy. You gave him more juice. Here's a little more then. Now she's got more juice than me. You let her light the fire in the fireplace and not me. Okay, you light a piece of paper. But this piece of paper is smaller than the one she lit, and so on and so on. An animal who gets his feeling of worth symbolically has to minutely compare himself to those around him to make sure he doesn't come off second best. Sibling rivalry is a critical problem that reflects the basic human condition. It is not that children are vicious, selfish, or domineering. It is that they so openly express man's tragic destiny. He must desperately justify himself as an object of primary value in the universe. He must stand out, be a hero, make the biggest possible contribution to world life, show that he counts more than anything or anyone else. When we appreciate how natural it is for man to strive to be a hero, how deeply it goes in his evolutionary and organismic constitution, how openly he shows it as a child, then it is all the more curious how ignorant most of us are, consciously, of what we really want and need. In our culture anyway, especially in modern times, the heroic seems too big for us, or we too small for it. Tell a young man that he is entitled to be a hero, and he will blush. We disguise our struggle by piling up figures in a bank book to reflect privately our sense of heroic worth, or by having only a little better home in the neighborhood, a bigger car, brighter children. But underneath throbs the ache of cosmic specialness, no matter how we mask it in concerns of smaller scope. Occasionally, someone admits that he takes his heroism seriously, which gives most of us a chill, as did U.S. Congressman Mendel Rivers, who fed appropriations to the military machine and said he was the most powerful man since Julius Caesar. We may shudder at the crassness of earthly heroism of both Caesar and his imitators, but the fault is not theirs. It is in the way society sets up its hero system and in the people it allows to fill its roles. The urge to heroism is natural, and to admit it, honest. For everyone to admit it would probably release such a pent-up force as to be devastating to societies as they now are. The fact is that this is what society is and always has been: a symbolic action system, a structure of statutes and rules, customs and rules for behavior, designed to serve as the vehicle for earthly heroism. Each script is somewhat unique. Each culture has a different hero system. What the anthropologists call cultural relativity is thus really the relativity of hero systems the world over. But each cultural system is a dramatization of earthly heroics. Each system cuts out roles for performances of various degrees of heroism, from the high heroism of a Churchill, a Mao, or a Buddha, to the low heroism of the coal miner, the peasant, the simple priest. The plain, everyday earthly heroism wrought by gnarled working hands guiding a family through hunger and disease. It doesn't matter whether the cultural hero system is frankly magical, religious, or primitive, or secular, scientific, and civilized. It is still a mythical hero system in which people serve in order to earn a feeling of primary value, of cosmic specialness, of ultimate usefulness to creation, of unshakable meaning. They earn this feeling by carving out a place in nature, by building an edifice that reflects human value, a temple, a cathedral, a totem pole, a skyscraper, a family that spans 3 generations. The The hope and belief is that the things that man creates in society are of lasting worth and meaning, that they outlive or outshine death and decay, that man and his products count. When Norman O. Brown said that Western society since Newton, no matter how scientific or secular it claims to be, is still as religious as any other, this is what he meant. Civilized society is a hopeful belief and protest that science, money, and goods make man count more or for more than any other animal. In this sense, everything that man does is religious and heroic, and yet in danger of being fictitious and fallible. Story time, yeah. What up, Alias? The question that becomes then the most important one that man can put to himself is simply this: how conscious is he of what he is doing to earn his feeling of heroism? I suggested that if everyone honestly admitted this urge to be a hero, it would be a devastating release of truth. It would make men demand that culture give them their due, a primary sense of human value as unique contributors to cosmic life. How would our modern societies contrive to satisfy such an honest demand without being shaken to their foundations? Only those societies we today call primitive provided this feeling for their members. The minority groups in present-day industrial society who shout for freedom and human dignity are really clumsily asking that they be given a sense of primary heroism of which they have been cheated historically. This is why their insistent claims are so troublesome and upsetting. How do we do such an unreasonable thing within the ways in which society is now set up? They are asking for the impossible, is the way we usually put our bafflement. But the truth about the need for heroism is not easy for anyone to admit, even the very ones who want to have their claims recognized. There's the rub. As we shall see from our subsequent discussion, to become conscious of what one is doing to earn his feeling of heroism is the main self-analytic problem of life. Everything painful and sobering in what psychoanalytic genius and religious genius have discovered about man revolves around the terror of admitting what one is doing to earn his self-esteem. This is why human heroics is a blind drivenness that burns people up, and passionate people, a screaming for glory as uncritical and reflexive as the howling of a dog. In the more passive masses of mediocre men, it is disguised as they humbly and complainingly follow out the roles that society provides for their heroics and try to earn their promotions within the system, wearing the standard uniforms but allowing themselves to stick out, but ever so little and so safely, with a little ribbon or a red boutonniere, but not with head and shoulders. No, I'm sad. I'm sad. If we were to peel away this, if you're referring to the title, bro, first off, I'm a psychologist. I have a degree in psychology, and I'm a philosopher. Because I studied a lot of philosophy, and this is called the denial of death. So I'm guessing you're referring to that. But in this moment, you know, I'm just reading. I'm just vibing. In the grand scheme of things, I'm not okay. Because there's potentially a fucking war that might dodge a ceasefire, like a fucking pseudo ceasefire. And that pisses me off. But, you know, as a person who I am right now, reading in the comfort of my own home, listening to a song that I wrote in 20 seconds with the fucking space heater in the background while I have nice lights, like, I'm fine. But what if I wasn't? What would, you know? What's gonna change? Nothing's gonna change. There's a war going on. People are dying. How okay can I really be when all that shit's going on? You know what I'm saying? So yeah. So I'll say no, I'm not okay. But I'm doing better than than a lot of people will be doing, and I feel blessed for that fact. So yeah, this book's called The Denial of Death, and it is a discussion by this anthropologist who explores a lot of ideas and how people respond and react to death as a concept. And this is my second time reading it. I haven't read it in like 8 years, 10 years. Isn't that crazy? I read this shit like 8 years ago. So yeah, I'm just I think it's an important book, and it doesn't get talked about enough. So I'm trying to do all sorts of things by reading it here, because I think this might be the book that fucking reshaped my perspective on life and really like shifted my trajectory and my mindset. Well, I figure we should all try to look after each other, regardless of if we care or if we know. I don't know you or what's in your mind, but I might as well ask, because the amount of energy it takes, for sure. Oh, it's small. Oh yeah, I appreciate it, dude, because you're a regular, you know, so I trust you and I trust your intentions. And we don't know each other that well, and you don't realize this is like 60% of it for me, you know. And a lot of what I do is to help people freaking like find strength in themselves, and is to try to help people find strength in themselves by watching me find strength in myself every day, and like working hard and then growing. And then also I want to talk about things that people don't really talk about, because a lot of it is existential, and a lot of that fuels life purpose or like sense of being, belonging, yada yada yada. And then I use my silliness as a fucking way to draw people in. But this is like 60% of it for me. It's like just trying to make the best of my fucking privilege and the stuff that I learned in my life to try to help other people find a nice mindset for their own lives, especially in these troubled times, you know. So while the people are dying and while we're all fucking afraid of the president of the United States, the least I can do is try to freaking give people some hope in their own lives, or like a better like sense of understanding of things we might not be thinking about consciously, like how societies or people might react to the idea of death being a primary driver for our way of being in this world. You should read the novel of the white powder. All right. I won't read it now, of course, but I definitely will put it in my reading folder. You should read The Denial of Death. I appreciate it, though. Yep, you too. Keep it up. Stay cool, stay safe, stay caring, and yeah, I appreciate you asking. But yeah, ask me a question, man. I'm probably gonna give you an answer you're not ready for. What up, Holly? And on this note, I'm gonna freaking refill my water. It's empty. But yeah, I'm just getting into this reading. I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm already on page 26. I probably skipped like 10 pages though. Either they were blank or they were just not relevant. But I'll probably be here for another at least 10, 15 pages. So yeah, I'm gonna grab some water. Be right back. If we were to peel away this massive disguise, excuse me. The blocks. If we were to peel away this massive disguise, the blocks of repression over human techniques for earning glory, we would arrive at the potentiality, we would arrive at the potentially most liberating question of all, the main problem of human life. How empirically true is the cultural hero system that sustains and drives men? We mentioned the meaner side of man's urge to cosmic heroism, but there's obviously the noble side as well. Man will lay down his life for his country, his society, his family. He will choose to throw himself on a grenade to save his comrades. He is capable of the highest generosity and self-sacrifice, but he has to feel and believe that what he is doing is truly heroic, timeless, and surprisingly meaningful. The crisis of modern society is precisely that the youth no longer feel heroic in the plan for action that their culture has set up. They don't believe it is empirically true to the problems of their lives and times. We are living a crisis of heroism that reaches into every aspect of our social life. The dropouts of university heroism, of business and career heroism, of political action heroism, the rise of anti-heroes, those who would be heroic in his own way, or like Charles Manson with his special family. Those whose tormented heroics lash out at the system that itself has ceased to represent agreed heroism. The great perplexity of our time, the turning of our age, is that the youth have sensed, for better or for worse, a great social historical truth. That just as there are useless self-sacrifices in unjust wars, so too is there an ignoble heroics of whole societies. It can be the viciously destructive heroics of Hitler's Germany, or the plain, debasing, and silly heroics of the acquisition and display of consumer goods, the piling up of money and privileges that now characterizes whole ways of life, capitalist and Soviet. And the crisis of society is, of course, the crisis of organized religion, too. Religion is no longer valid as a hero system, and so the youth scorn it. If traditional culture is discredited as heroics, then the church that supports that culture automatically discredits itself. If the church, on the other hand, chooses to insist its own special heroics, it might find that in crucial ways, it must work against the culture, recruit youth to be anti-heroes to the ways of life of the society they live in. This is the dilemma of religion in our time, and this book was written in like 1930s or some shit. Conclusion. What I have tried to do in this brief introduction is to suggest that the problem of heroics is the central one of human life, that it goes deeper into human nature than anything else because it is based on organismic narcissism and on the child's need for self-esteem as the condition for his life. Society itself is a codified hero system, which means that society everywhere is a living myth of the significance of human life, a defiant creation of meaning. Every society, thus, is a religion, whether it thinks so or not. Soviet religion, Maoist religion, are as truly religious as are scientific and consumer religion, no matter how much they may try to disguise themselves by omitting religious and spiritual ideas from their lives. As we shall see further on, it was Otto Rank who showed psychologically this religious nature of all human cultural creation, and more recently the idea was revived by Norman O. Brown in his Life Against Death, and by Robert J. Lifton in his Revolutionary Immortality. If we accept these suggestions, then we must admit that we are dealing with the universal human problem, and we must be prepared to probe into it as honestly as possible, to be as shocked by self-revelation of man as the best thought will allow, Let us pick this thought up with Kierkegaard and take it through Freud to see where the stripping down of the last 150 years will lead us. If the penetrating honesty of a few books could immediately change the world, then the 5 authors just mentioned would already have shaken the nations to their foundations. But since everyone is carrying on as though the vital truths about man did not yet exist, it is necessary to add still another weight in the scale of human self-exposure. For 2,500 years, we have hoped and believed that if mankind could reveal itself to itself, could widely come to know its own cherished motives, then somehow it would tilt the balance of things in its own favor. The Psychology of Heroism, Part 1. I drink not from mere joy in wine, nor to scoff at faith. No, only to forget myself for a moment, that only do I want of intoxication. That alone. Omar Khayyam. Chapter 2. The Terror of Death. Is it not for us to confess that in our civilized attitude towards death, we are once more living psychologically beyond our means, and must reform and give truth its due? Would it not be better to give death the place in actuality and in our thoughts which properly belongs to it, and to yield a little more prominence to that unconscious attitude towards death, which we have hitherto so carefully suppressed? This hardly seems indeed a greater achievement, but rather a backward step. But it has the merit of taking somewhat more into account the true state of affairs. Sigmund Freud. The first thing we have to do with heroism is to lay bare its underside, to show what gives human heroics a specific nature and impetus. Here we introduce directly one of the great rediscoveries of modern thought, that of all things that move man, one of the principal ones is his terror of death. After Darwin, the problem of death as an evolutionary one came to the fore, and many thinkers immediately saw that it was a major psychological problem for man. They also very quickly saw what real heroism was about. As Shaler wrote just at the turn of the century, heroism is first and foremost a reflex of the terror of death. We admire most the courage to face death. We give such valor our heights and most constant adoration. You know what? True. Oops. Y'all know what this means.